Almost Twins by Mark Fielding Darden. Chapter 14, Dead Man's Curve, 2012. The large surf was breaking across the bay to the east, and a new four-wheel drive Toyota Hilo was waiting to take them into Rio Piedra to the west. 1 hour later, they were on horses heading for the Indian Rock along the coast. The Spaulding estate was disappearing in the afternoon sun behind them. Geoff had a backpack with 6 cold Panama beers and some plantain chips. The tide was extremely low, and Georgie was smiling. The trip up the side of the cliff was not easy for the men. They were no longer 16, and the trail was barely discernible. Nevertheless, they zigzagged between the sharp boulders and made it to the top, where they tied their horses to what looked like the same shrub they had tied them to decades earlier. As they dismounted and spied the stunning sunset, Geoff yelled, "Hey, look at that!" To which Georgie replied, "Wow, isn't that cool?" Both men immediately returned in their minds to the first time they had ever been to the Indian Rock. They were suddenly teenagers again. The sun had just begun its descent across the not-so-peaceful Pacific as they crept onto the large flat Indian Rock they had sat on so many times before as kids. It was still an imposing and intimidating rock, though it was pleasantly warm from the afternoon sun. The ledge was 12,000 miles away from the nearest land to the west, Hawaii, and about 1,200 feet above the sharp rocks and hidden pool below. The end of time. It was indeed the rock that was the end of time for Georgie. And in a way, it was the rock that would be the end of time for Geoff, too. But for now, both men had become boys again. Geoff pulled 2 beers from his backpack, and the twins quickly popped them open. Next came the plantain chips. Soon they were munching away and enjoying the sound of the surf below, along with the breezes and views that would make most people faint. The edge of the cliff was literally 2 feet away, but neither boy seemed to notice. After 4 minutes of complete silence, they popped open 2 more beers and suddenly began singing "Pretty Woman" at exactly the same time together. Surprised as hell, they started laughing like 2 kids being tickled to death. When they caught their breath a few minutes later, Geoff said, "I love you, brother." Georgie said, "I love you too." Georgie was still grinning with a little beer foaming out of the side of his mouth when Geoff said, "Do you remember the time you saw me kissing Eliza that day on the swing?" Georgie stopped smiling and said, "I thought you didn't see me watching." After a few seconds, Geoff smiled and said, "I didn't." Well, that got both of them laughing hysterically again, and they popped open 2 more beers. Geoff shook his up and started squirting it on Georgie. Then Georgie did the same back on Geoff. The bag of chips suddenly flew off the edge of the cliff, and that sent the boys on a giggle roll again. Georgie grabbed Geoff, and they began to tussle with each other, laughing all the while, just inches from the edge. After a few moments, the boys, now wet with beer, became old men again and ran out of energy. Still laughing, Georgie said, "I go now, Geoff. Is it okay?" Geoff got very quiet and said, "Yes, Georgie, it's just you and me. It's always been just you and me. And it will always be just you and me. But I can't go with you this time, brother." Georgie stared long and hard into his brother's eyes and said, "I know. I'll go alone this time. You'll never have to worry about me again. I let you rest. We had a beer now anyway." And as the sun hit its most beautiful zenith on the horizon, George Spaulding smiled, gripped his perfect brother's shark-scarred hands for the very last time, and quietly pushed Geoff backwards off the Indian Rock into eternity. There were no red waves this time. There was no shark. There was no guilt. There were no sounds other than the breakers, the birds, the wind, and the occasional snorting of the one lone horse, Georgie's horse, tied to the bush. All the beer was gone. All the guilt was gone. And Geoff was gone too. This time, forever. Epilogue, 2013 and beyond. Years later, brain-damaged but highly imaginative, Georgie would walk along the beach below their home in Rio Piedra, dealing with his cancer, dragging his mangled leg as he went, to where his brother had died that day long ago in that dreadful shark attack. Georgie still lived at the family's home and would often recall the spooky thunderclap and the shiny maroon-gray waves that smothered his brother in a red tide when they were just boys. He would remember the huge shark that did not stop until it had consumed his best friend and himself. He would wonder for the rest of his life what it would have been like to grow up with his perfect brother. And he lived in that world, in his mind, with his perfect brother, the brother who was so smart and was everything Georgie wanted to be. Geoff, the perfect brother, who gave his life for Georgie when they were just 14 years old. Geoff, the brother who died in 1964. Some say Georgie lived with Geoff in a secret universe until they were old men, until that last trip to the Indian Rock. That he invented the successful life Geoff had and shared it with him in his head, so that his damaged life would have meaning. That he invented the Indian Rock, the magic beach, and all the rest. I can tell you this. There was a home and a wonderful family named the Spauldings. Enrico, Angelica, and Eliza were real people. The snake was real. There was a huge shark that hurt Georgie and killed Geoff when Geoff tried to rescue Georgie. There was a ton of guilt. Then there was a bad woman who accused Georgie of assault and cost him 10+ years of his life in a California clinic. There was a stroke, a cancer diagnosis, and a plane trip back to Punta Mala. There was a magic beach, and the Indian Rock was real too. All the bad stuff was real. But what about the good stuff? There wasn't much good stuff. You got that right. The backstory. Up next.